Good evening. Welcome to this episode of Prophecy for the Last Hour. My name is Lisbeth McGee. I am your host, and again, I have meat prepared at the dinner hour. So thank you for joining. And tonight's topic, I don't have a title yet, but I do tell you the way I feel. I feel like a deer in the headlights, because this information, if I've connected the dots correctly, is like, I don't even know what to say. The Bible talks about a grand delusion, or that the whole world will believe a lie, or it gives it a couple that there will just be such a veil of deceit and falsehood over people in the last days that many people will be deceived. And I'm like, I just keep going down this rabbit trail, and I just keep going. It's bigger than I thought every time. It's like bigger and bigger and bigger. All that being said, what I had a hunch about, I consider myself sort of this way to sort of be a researcher, or as you would say, an investigative historian, trying to go back and study really deep all sorts of questions and that people might pose, and going back and reading all the source documents. So what I started doing was reading source documents of ancient historians. And I hit pay dirt. So I don't even know how to begin to say this, but let me just give it a try. I apologize for my rabbit trails. I apologize for not finishing my sentences, putting my glasses on and off, or whatever. Just try to get a few threads, a few nuggets of truth out of this. I found a couple of books. Now, I've said this before, a couple of things. History, we're in a propaganda war. That's the way I've always looked at it. Truth has always been under siege, and truth is sometimes usually written by the victors. And so I spend a lot of time, like I said, going back and reading source documents to try to discern for myself if I can ferret out what I consider to be the true story, which has taken me into reading not only the Bible, the greatest book ever written, but all of the literature available, from the Dead Sea Scrolls to the Apocryphas to the Gnostic texts to now the Zohar to the Apocrypha, to whatever. There's just too much information out there, people. There's no excuse to not get every question answered. But I found these books. It seems to me that the British historians, actually, of the last century, from around 1850 to around 214, there was an amazing explosion of scholarship going on as they were finding all these ancient texts and documents again, because we had access now to Palestine again to a large extent, and there was a great amount of archaeology going on, and people finding and the translations. And there were unbelievable some scholars who were translating these texts, and so much information was coming forward again. There was one book I found called Corey's Ancient Fragments of History, and these are who had gone back and, again, was citing all these ancient texts. Now, these are secular historians. I'm not quoting anything from the Bible tonight, pretty much. I'm just going to give you what quote-unquote secular historians who lived at different ages said about their histories. So this guy pulls together histories of Babylonian, Egyptian, Carthaginian, Phoenician history. Some of the historians they quote, like Epiphanes, Berosus, and Megasthenes, who is actually Berosus and Megasthenes are Chaldean. Chaldean refers to Assyrian, which refers to Babylonian. Menetho, who is Egyptian. Alexander Polyhistor, I think he's a little more recent, like closer to Alexander. Of course, Scott, I'm just trying to throw this. The thing is, I'm not writing a book. I don't have everything heavily footnoted. I just want to tell you some of the places where I went, where I really did read source documents. And the cut and paste queen that I am, I have all of these little snippets to share with you. But let me just start by this, because I thought this was a very interesting history. This is this is from, I believe, and also Josephus and Eusebius. Now, Josephus was one of the greatest historians of Hebraic history, and Eusebius, one of the greatest historians of Christian history, but just not that. They also wrote histories of the world, and they also accessed all these texts, as did Jerome and Clement and Augustine and all these people. So this is from, let me see if I can find my starting point, because I wanted to say, all right, let me just find this. This is from Josephus, but Josephus is quoting from an earlier historian, and I can't find it off the top of my head. Furthermore, now this is a discussion or history of the ancients. Now, part of the whole premise is, as I said before, because actually what I'm going to be talking about, if you followed me my last 2 videos, is breaking down the world very compactly into 2,000 years, 2 and 2 and 2, which equals 6, where we're at. The first 2,000 years are known as the time of chaos. And I'm telling you, it really was unbelievable chaos. And because in that time you had the flood. But this is the world of the gods and the demi-gods. And I went back into to the history books to see if I could find any of the names of, let's say, our biblical patriarchs with some of these gods and demigods, these people. And I had pay dirt. There's only one history we've all been going through. The thing is, everybody's been writing it through their culture, their names, their language. Because when God did divide the languages at Babel, it just, everything got kind of divided and told in so many different ways. Anyways, this is Josephus. He talks about, further, God may have granted them, the ancients, a longer life on account of their virtue and the usefulness of the arts which they invented, astronomy, geometry, things which they could not have announced with certainty had they not lived at least 600 years. This is some of the astronomical signs. For by that number, the great year is completed. That's from Josephus 15. From comparing the life of the men of old with the life now and the short years that we live, let no one suppose that the statements concerning the former are false, I mean their longevity of life, and inferring that they did not attain to that length of life from the fact that men do not now extend the life of their life so long. And the truth of my argument is testified by all who have written on ancient history among Greeks and barbarians. For both Manetho, who recorded the Egyptian history, and Berosus, who collected the Chaldean annuals, and Melos and Hestiarius, and in addition to them, the Egyptian Hieronymus and the compiler of Phoenician history agree with what I say. Hesed too, and Hecataeus and Hellenaeus and Archelaus, and besides these, Epiphorus and Nicolaus of Damascus, Damascenus, all agree that the ancients lived 1,000 years. So Christian, just don't stand down. This is actually historical in all of the historical records by reputable historians, quote unquote, say who just are recording this is a fact, because both sides. Well, let me just say, that is the record, that is the testimony of the ancients, that they lived this long. For as they were beloved of God and created by God himself, and as their kinds of foods were better fitted for longer continuance, it was natural for them to live so many years. That's a quote from Abedenius. But there are some who argue that let me just finish reading. But there are some who say that the men who first arose out of the earth, being puffed up by their stature and strength, and proudly thinking that they were better than the gods, raised a huge tower where Babylon now stands, and when they were already near to heaven, the winds came to the help of the gods and overthrew their structure upon them, the ruins of which were called Babylon. And being up to that time of one tongue, they received from the gods a confused language. And afterwards, okay, so there you have two things. You have a testimony from all these historians attesting to their ancient years and of Babylon, of, of, of the Tower of Babel and its overthrow. Now, isn't this interesting though? But by their food. You know, one of the big issues today is our food. The food we're eating today, is it shortening our lifestyle? Is it actually killing us? I just thought it was really interesting here that, you know, I've always said that you are what you eat and you are what you think. So anyways, now this is where I want to go into some of these as they started to connect the dots, and as you started to go from the Egyptians, let's say, to the Greeks, to the Babylonians, it's the same player, what they called them, okay? Now, so this is what I have pretty much deduced, and then I will continue to read and give you how they... So, the story goes that there was a flood, right? No, let me even start better. The only way for me or anyone today, if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to understand the whole point of what happened in the garden. You have to get away from your kindergarten understanding, which is what they try to make everybody be satisfied with, that Eve ate an apple or whatever. You have to go deep and get to the understanding of what's going on. Two bloodlines came out of this whole affair. You have the Cainites, who are the children of Eve, and the children of the serpent. The serpent is not like a snake. He isn't a Kash. And I'm going to show you this in all the different... He is a race of created being. He is a race of a son of God who was created. And this is the first hybrid or the first demigod that was produced. Now, whatever. But it's the testimony across the board. Abel of Adam and Eve, Abel dies, replaced by Seth, the Sethites. Okay, so you have two, and this is called the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman that went forth throughout history, repopulating the whole earth. This is the whole point. And you have enmity and war, which is what God said. There's going to be enmity and war between these bloodlines till the total wrap up. And that is the story of history. And you're never going to get it unless you understand that, unless you can piece together. And Jesus said, you will know them by their fruits, unless you can piece together which side is up, which side is, and who's who, and what's going on. Now, that being said, the story goes... And this is where I'm sorry, you're never going to get what happened before the flood unless you start to read the literature that is available. And the secularists testify to it along with the biblical records. But after the flood, the world was repopulated again. So that's where I'm going to pick up again. Noah, so supposedly, got off the boat with his three sons, and we know them biblically, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, fine. And they repopulated the earth. Okay, so the story goes biblically that Ham, there was an altercation. And let me just say this, if you know the story, supposedly Ham, Noah redivided the earth, and at this point, you understand something. These people are living hundreds and hundreds of years. This is where we get into the concept of the gods and the demi-gods. The gods are here, the demi-gods, God. These people are not normal by anybody's reckoning. They're not, in all the records, they're not normal in height and stature. They're not normal in abilities. But we say their intelligence are greater. They live longer. They marry or they progenerate in crazy ways and in enormous fashion. So we're not dealing with, you have to begin to wrap your mind why, and mythology doesn't mean it's not true. It's just that these stories have a little bit of larger to life to them because they are. I don't know why we have a problem with this. But pivotally, why I'm so enamored of this whole concept of getting to the bottom of this. Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be again in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Well, we're in the days of the coming of the Son of Man, so what was going on in Noah's day? So that's getting to the bottom of this. Oh my gosh, people. So anyways, but Nimrod, there's a story with Ham. There was a problem. If you read all the text, Ham became a problem child again. He was cursed. Through him, his seed was cursed, and to Kanan because of an act that he did. And it seems to be from the records. Now, this is what I want to say, because the bloodlines, it seems to be the boy Shem, we know, produced, according to the biblical record, a righteous seed line. They kind of stayed in the house. They stayed with Noah. They stayed with the God of their father, Noah. These, by and large, these peoples, they had the Noahide laws. These are things we need to understand. These people had moral codes straight from God about how to live with each other in society. They had the Noahide laws, which are like the 10 Commandments. They had precepts, ordinances. God didn't leave. Believe me, there was a full body of understanding on how to live righteously. And unless you understand that, a lot of the stories don't make sense. But Noah, what's his name? Ham, had a couple of very interesting things happen in him and then through his children. So that's where we're going to pick up. Because it seems that Ham is our first truly mythological character after the flood. And because Ham picked up on the behaviors and the lifestyles and the worldviews and the magic and the witchcraft and everything, the sorceries, everything that they were doing before the flood. That's why you have this kind of gulf and war that's continuing now, and it seems to go through the sons of Ham and versus the sons of Shem. And then a lot of ways you have Japheth, who's sort of the middle child, who's just sort of just there doing his thing. But this is sometimes on one side, sometimes on the other side. But it is really with Ham. Now, in a lot of the mythological stories, and this is what the secular historians will tell you, Ham basically became known as Cronus. So if you get your mythological ears on, so to speak, he had his 4 children: Cush, Mitzrayim, Kanan, and then Cush had this son called Nimrod. And that story is and that is truly the story, in my opinion now, and this is the story of the Cainite bloodline, along with, because you understand, there's many players in this thing, there's many kind of levels of understanding about it. But this mythology, they planted ancient Egypt and they planted ancient Babylon, okay, which in Bible typology, Egypt and Babylon are the big empires, and they're constantly tripping up God's people. But to plant, let's just stick right there, okay, because biblically, you have to understand what I call prophet speak. So when the writers are using words like to plant, like Noah planted a vineyard, we're not really talking about him planting grapes and drinking wine and getting drunk. That's all parabolic language for what was really to plant a seed. Let me just go back to this to prove to you. When Adam was told that the planting of the ground for him now would yield up thorns and thistles, which is tares, which now out of his seed. See, you plant seed. You have to think of this terms truly and progeny. So to plant means you're planting seed somewhere. You're planting progeny, okay? And it really does, in its clinical sense, has to do with the DNA, has to do with recombinant things that you can do with DNAs. And that's really the darker, deeper side of this whole subject. But let's just stick to the surface levels that Ham, the son, now Ham, if you read a lot of your textologies, Noah had 3 wives. The third wife, I can't even go into this, the third wife, I'm never going to get anywhere, had Cainite bloodline in her. But God had said to do this. I want you to do this because I want this bloodline to go through the flood. And Ham knew this. Now, so when Ham uncovered his father's nakedness, this is all very parabolic language for something that was really, and hopefully I can end with this, and it's just so, you'll see why I'm like a deer with my eyes just frozen by the headlights. I can't even believe this. But let's just go through this, okay? So most of the mythology was trying to say is really about the bloodlines of Ham's progeny and anyone else who wanted to join him, because he just started it, but a lot of people could join into his parade, so to speak. This is them behaving badly. The mythology is these guys behaving badly, living still for hundreds of years, planting seed in ground. So when Athena plants Attica, that means she is a progenitor for this whole race of people, or this whole tribe, this whole nation, this whole group that's going to come. This is how you have to see this. So Ham was Chronos, okay? Because it goes on right here what I was going to say right out of this. The last thing I was quoting you from all these ancient, see, Josephus was compiling histories from all these other ancient historians, from Molus and Hestatius and Hellenaeus, everything. So I just said that, and they were already, about Babel, how it says that the gods came down, overthrew their structure, and being up to that time of one language, they received from the gods a confused language. And afterwards, war rose between Cronus and Titan. Now, there you got to ask you, so Chronos is Ham, and now I'm still putting this together, so I'm not saying that thus saith the Lord, but I know now that we are talking about these people. This is the story. These are the names, the mythology. Now, I'm sure through telephone, it's all, you know, I'm sure it's probably not 100% accurate, but the concept that this is the storyline we're talking about. It actually happened. These are the people. Titan, I think, could have been Shem, all right? And I think he was. But see, this is a race of people. Then you get into the whole war between the Titans and the Olympians. Now we can begin to explain and to understand this. And these are amongst the histories amongst the pagan nations. See, you know, of course, we'll say on our side, we win. They'll say on their side, they win. They wouldn't be fighting today if they didn't think they had a shot at winning. So, and afterwards, war arose between Cronus and Titan. Okay, so the first you have to understand is he's known basically in mythology as Chronos. Now these guys have tons and tons of epithets, plus when you change the culture, the name changes with them. So stick with me as I give you some of these names for Ham, because he was the original patriarch, first of all, of his whole sons going forward, his whole line of people, and he was one of three who repopulated within 400 years, to say even 300 years, the historians, they had repopulated and rebuilt the whole world. And let me tell you something, these are not people who are isolated to a little Mesopotamian valley. This thing is worldwide. It is always worldwide. It was worldwide before the flood. This is another little trick they play on our minds so that we don't put the dots together. You think all those cultures over it, the Mayans and the Aztecs and all these people and the indigenous peoples in this nation, they came from nowhere? No, these are all remnant races of the peoples that are from these same people groups again, okay? So now Belus, which is another name for him, Moloch is another name. But the name, he also is called King of the Rephas, R-E-P-H-A-S. Now you'll know a Rephas is the root word, Repa, R-E-P-H, is the root word for Rephaim, which is what happened now. And this will explain totally here in the end why Joshua, had to go into the land, Joshua, and just clean it out, because it had, again, completely hybridized evilly, wickedly in ways that we can't even imagine, but is going on under the radar. So, I just say, Ephraim, you just got to wake up. You just got to we're supposed to be wise as serpents and harmless, and we're supposed to know what our enemy has done and is doing. So anyways, Repas is one of the titles for Chronos, the title for Ham. Okay, because from him sprang all the giants again, as it says that, and there were in Genesis 6, there were giants in the earth in those days, and again afterwards, meaning after the flood, it all came right back. So this whole thing, so he was king of the Rephas, king of the giants, okay? And these are giants before and after the flood. His wife was Astaroth, one of his wives. Astaroth, we know now, is the queen of heaven, and his daughter, Athena. So all right, so he had, Okay, so let's just stop there with Ham. It's Chronos, okay? Now his son Mitzrayim, who goes off and founds the Egyptian dynasty, okay? In Egypt, it seems that Osiris is Mitzrayim, okay? From these peoples, we get peoples like the Ludites, the Anamites, the Philistines come from the Kalushites, who are of Mitzrayim, okay? And Mens, M-E-N-E-S, one of the major gods, the major god of Israel, of Egypt, okay, Mitzrayim. Now, Kanan, we know, was one of the founding sons of a group called the Phoenicians, okay? One of his other names in Greek is Asbolos, and he was one of his sons was Sidon. So you have the Sidonians, but you also have, he created races from him, and these are really the problem. These became the 70 kings in the land that Joshua had to clean out. Now, I'm not going to go, but these are the people who finally ended up, the people groups in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, the deepness of what these people are doing, they are, I wonder if I should just go here to explain, but the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Gigashites, the Hivites, the Archites, the Zemanites, if you follow, these are all the names of the peoples and their kings, Og of Bashan, who Joshua had to come out and clean the land. These are not, this is not, we don't have a genocidal God, believe me, people. If he hadn't done this, if he hadn't cleaned up the mess that again had been made in the genetics, in the bloodline, so we could live in a peaceable earth. Because when they first got off the boat, so to speak, the record is they lived in basic peace and harmony for maybe 200 years. And they went off into their different lands. But Ham, I'm going to get into the stories of this, Ham was not the firstborn. When he realized how it was going down and he was not the firstborn, which means you get the spiritual inheritance and the blessing of the land, the blessing, it was going to Shem, the righteous bloodline, and a lot of bad blood started to between the boys, and they started to fight. People got back into this warlike mentality. Of course, all up, and the other thing above, in our soul category, we're all being manipulated by demonic entities and by these higher level, entities, all right? But be that as it may, we're just sticking sort of with the boots on the ground, okay? Now, all right, so what were they doing? This is an interesting little, I was going to end with this, but I think I'll just go over to this because, I looked up what an X-man is. Because, see, it's the same thing. And see, this is Satan. He's counting on, this is his strategy, he's counting on the world being completely and 100% ignorant of history, of this fact that this has happened before, that this will be the third time, okay, that this level of insurrection against God and his established orders has gone on in really a war, and Satan is using the humanoids and in a war really ultimately against Yahweh Elohim. But when you understand this kind of thing, but this concept of the X-Men, which has been really reintroduced in the last 50 years, Marvel Comics, this whole world of mythology being repackaged, but this time we're so divorced from it ever having any grounding in reality. This is what he's counting on us being stupid and thinking that this is all fantasy and fiction. But this is from, so I looked up what an X-Man was, and the X-Men are mutants. They're a subspecies of humans who are born with superhuman abilities. Now that is, okay, the X-Men fight, spare me, for peace and equality between